When I saw my mother-in-law swipe her card 3 times, and every time it was declined, I felt my stomach drop into the pit of the earth. We were sitting at a small, sunny cafe, the kind with chipped wooden tables and the aroma of fresh bread drifting from the open kitchen. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday lunch, just the two of us, my husband away on a business trip. I thought it would be a pleasant moment, a tiny escape from the hum of our cramped apartment, the bickering of neighbors, and the endless errands that seemed to define my weekdays. Instead, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Why are all the cards blocked?" she muttered again, her voice tight, almost trembling. I could hear the faint clink of cutlery hitting plates as other patrons glanced over, their curiosity politely restrained. She dug into her handbag, pulling out one card after another, a ritual that seemed endless. My own hand hovered over my purse, as if reaching for my own card might somehow salvage the dignity slipping through our fingers. I don't know," I said, my own voice sounding foreign even to me. "Maybe the bank's having issues? It happens sometimes." I tried to keep the edge of panic from creeping in, but it had already settled like a stone in my chest. She stared at me, her eyes a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "It's not just one. It's all of them. How can this happen?" Her hands shook slightly as she pushed the last card across the counter. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, a floral scent that had once been comforting but now seemed almost ironic in this moment of vulnerability. I had always thought of my mother-in-law, Anissa, as proud, meticulous, sharp. The woman who could plan an entire wedding in a month, who never forgot birthdays or anniversaries, who held her family's image with such careful perfection. And now, here she was, fumbling in front of a stranger at the cafe counter, every attempt failing, the quiet humiliation written plainly across her face. "Let's just sit a minute," I whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. It was warm, but tense. She didn't move away, but her jaw clenched. I understood the sting of pride, the sudden helplessness, the feeling of being exposed. I had felt it before myself, though never like this, never publicly. I glanced at the waiter, who was hovering politely, an apologetic smile in place but confusion in his eyes. "Would you like me to call the bank?" I asked softly, but she shook her head. "No. I'll figure it out," she said, though her voice carried that brittle edge of a woman who's used to controlling every situation, yet finds herself stripped bare by something as mundane as a payment system. And then I noticed the tension twist into something sharper, something almost fearful. It wasn't just embarrassment, there was worry beneath it, the kind that made the hands tremble and the voice catch. I had seen that look before, years ago, when she'd whispered late at night about bills overdue, expenses she thought we never noticed. I hadn't paid much attention then. I thought, maybe, it was just the usual strain of adult life. But now, seeing it here, in the middle of a bustling cafe, it felt urgent, personal, dangerous in a way I couldn't yet name. We sat there, quiet, the warm sunlight falling across the table, the scent of coffee and baked bread mixing with something heavier, an unspoken tension that neither of us knew how to resolve. And in that moment, I realized this was only the beginning. Something had shifted. Something hidden beneath polite conversation and carefully curated appearances was about to unravel. After what felt like an eternity, we finally left the cafe, walking in silence along the narrow, sunlit street. Anissa's hand brushed mine once, almost apologetically, but she didn't speak. I didn't either. I wasn't sure what words could bridge the sudden chasm between us. Her usual aura of confidence was gone, replaced by a fragile, uncertain version of herself I rarely saw. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of cooking spices and the lavender air freshener my husband insisted on keeping in the hallway. I hung my coat, still unsure how to navigate the tension that clung to the air like static. Anissa sat at the kitchen table, fingers drumming lightly on the worn surface. "I'll call the bank tomorrow," she said finally, her voice softer now, but there was still an edge of unease. "It's probably nothing, just a technical error." She avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the chipped rim of her coffee cup. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the instinct that had crept into my chest at the cafe, the one whispering that something wasn't right, refused to leave. I had lived with her for 3 months now, after my husband's sudden transfer to the city, and I knew her routines, her quirks, even her stubborn pride. Something about the way she hesitated, the careful measure of her words, felt different. Over the next few days, life tried to insist on normalcy. I went to work, answering emails and attending meetings, hearing her humming quietly in the apartment when I returned. She cooked her usual elaborate meals, setting the table just so, insisting that I try her experimental spice combinations. The laughter and chatter we shared in those moments felt almost ordinary, but beneath it, I could feel the undercurrent of unease. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I noticed the first real clue. I was sorting through the mail when a letter from the bank slipped out of Anissa's pile, addressed to her but partially obscured. My curiosity won over, and I glanced at the envelope. The text made my heart tighten, account suspended due to overdraft and unpaid dues. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling slightly. I placed the envelope back on the table, trying to mask the sudden surge of dread. Overdraft? Unpaid dues? Anissa was meticulous, she had to be. She planned everything, kept spreadsheets, budgets, lists. How could she have let this happen? That night, I tried to bring it up gently, over dinner. Anissa. I saw a letter from the bank, I began, watching her carefully. Is everything okay with your accounts? Her fork paused mid-air, the gesture frozen. I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat. Yes, everything's fine, she said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. There was a hesitation in her voice, a subtle avoidance, and the way her hands trembled slightly when she picked up the napkin told me more than words ever could. I realized then that this wasn't just a technical issue, not just bad luck. Something deeper, something I couldn't yet see, was stirring beneath the surface. In the days that followed, subtle signs emerged. She double-checked receipts, avoided certain phone calls, and sometimes stared off into the distance, lost in thought. Each little moment gnawed at me, a quiet alarm I couldn't silence. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the moment at the cafe was just the first ripple of a much larger problem. I started paying closer attention, noting details, listening to the spaces between her words. The tension was a puzzle, and I was determined to solve it, even if it meant confronting truths I wasn't sure I wanted to face. It was midweek when the first real confrontation happened, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I had returned home from work earlier than usual, the city's drizzle still dampening my coat, the scent of wet asphalt clinging faintly to my hair. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, but I figured Anissa was simply preparing dinner or resting after a long day. I found her in the living room, hunched over the laptop, her fingers flying over the keys with a tense, almost mechanical rhythm. A stack of receipts and bank statements lay spread across the coffee table. My stomach sank. Anissa, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up quickly, her face pale, eyes darting like a bird trapped in a cage. I'm just checking some things, she stammered, closing the laptop a fraction too quickly. Nothing to worry about. But worry had already taken root in my chest. I sat across from her, watching, listening. The way she avoided my gaze, the subtle tremor in her hands, the sigh that slipped out before she caught it, all of it screamed that something was wrong. I tried again, gently this time. The other day, at the cafe, it wasn't just a technical issue, was it? Her eyes flickered, a storm hiding behind the surface she worked so hard to keep calm. Finally, she leaned back, running a hand through her silver-streaked hair, and the words came out, low and hesitant. It's complicated, she said. Her voice was fragile, strained, carrying the weight of months, or maybe years, of stress. I didn't want you to worry. I nodded slowly, trying to stay calm. You can tell me, Anissa. I'm not going to judge. She swallowed hard, as if trying to push the words back into her throat, but they escaped anyway. There have been problems. With money. Bills I didn't pay. Accounts I didn't manage properly. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My chest tightened. I wanted to react, anger, disappointment, but I also felt something else, a deep, almost painful empathy. She wasn't reckless or careless, she was overwhelmed, trapped in her own expectations of perfection, afraid of letting anyone see her fail. I didn't know, I whispered. Why didn't you tell your son? Or me? I couldn't, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I thought if I just handled it quietly, no one would have to know. But it's worse than I imagined. And now it's affecting everything. The gravity of her words settled between us. I realized then that the cafe scene had been just the surface of a much deeper issue. The blocked cards, the overdrafts, the frantic attempts to cover up, these were symptoms of a life she had been quietly struggling to maintain. Over the next hour, we talked in hushed tones, the rain tapping softly against the windows. She showed me bank statements, payment reminders, the subtle spiral of debt that had crept up unnoticed. I listened, not judging, only absorbing the reality that had been hidden behind her polished exterior for so long. And as I listened, a quiet determination formed in me. This wasn't just about money or embarrassment, it was about trust, honesty, and the courage to confront hard truths. Something had shifted in our relationship in that moment. The tension, the distance, had not disappeared, but a fragile bridge had begun to form, a bridge that might allow us to navigate this storm together. By the time my husband called later that evening, I found myself calmly explaining that there were some issues we needed to sort out at home, that everything would be okay, but that it would take honesty and patience. Anissa listened quietly, the faintest shadow of relief flickering in her eyes. I knew the real test was only just beginning. The surface calm would not last. There were deeper currents beneath the quiet apology, currents I would need to trace if I wanted to fully understand, and possibly help, her. A few days later, the reality hit harder than I expected. I had gone to the local bank with Anissa to try to straighten out her accounts, and the encounter was more humiliating than either of us anticipated. The clerk's polite smiles did little to mask the sharp, judging glances of those waiting in line. I could feel Anissa stiffen beside me, her usual composure dissolving into small, anxious movements, tapping her fingers, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, muttering half apologies under her breath. "Ma'am, your accounts are significantly overdrawn," the bank officer explained in a tone that was neutral but unforgiving. "We can help set up a repayment plan, but this cannot continue unchecked." Anissa nodded silently, her lips pressed together, eyes fixed on the laminated brochure she held as if it could shield her from the embarrassment. I reached over, touching her hand lightly. "We'll figure this out," I whispered. It wasn't just reassurance for her, it was a reminder to myself that we weren't facing this alone. Later, walking back to the apartment under the soft drizzle, the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on me. Something about the way she had kept this hidden, the way she had tried to shoulder it all silently, gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking, why hadn't she asked for help sooner? Was it pride? Fear? Or something else entirely? That evening, I stayed up longer than usual, quietly watching her as she sorted through receipts and old statements on the dining table. The room smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and tea, the dim light casting long shadows on her face. I realized then that this was more than a financial issue, it was a fracture in trust. Not because she had made mistakes, but because she had carried them alone, leaving the rest of the family in the dark. I decided I needed answers, and not just about numbers. I needed to understand how it had gotten this far. "Anissa," I started, my voice gentle but firm, "I need you to be honest with me. Did anything else happen, something that might explain why this isn't just an oversight?" She froze, the pen she was holding hovering in mid-air. For a moment, silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was someone," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the papers scattered before her. Not in the way you think. But a friend, someone I trusted, helped me, and it went wrong. I didn't realize the full consequences. My chest tightened. The words were ambiguous, but heavy with implication. She wasn't lying, at least not completely, but she wasn't telling everything either. I felt a storm of emotions, shock, confusion, and a subtle ache of betrayal. Who? I asked cautiously. She shook her head. It's complicated. I can't explain it fully right now. I thought I could fix it, handle it myself, but it's bigger than I imagined. I didn't mean for you to be dragged into this. And in that moment, I understood. The blocked cards, the overdrafts, the frantic hush of secrecy, it was all part of a larger puzzle. Not just financial mismanagement, but decisions made under pressure, trust misplaced, and pride that had become a barrier to seeking help. I felt a cold, creeping clarity. Whatever had gone wrong, it was bigger than a simple mistake. It involved choices, and those choices had consequences, ones we were about to face together, whether we were ready or not. That night, I lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the radiator and the faint ticking of the clock. I realized that in trying to protect her pride, she had unintentionally endangered our peace, our sense of security. And now, it was my turn, to confront, to understand, and to navigate the fallout. The betrayal wasn't dramatic or malicious, it was subtle, insidious, and painfully human. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I knew that the next steps would be difficult, demanding both honesty and courage from both of us. The next morning, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't just sit and wait for Anissa to untangle the mess on her own. She had tried, and it had nearly broken her. I needed a plan, something practical, grounded, something that would address the problem without shaming her further. I started by gathering all the bank statements, receipts, and letters she had quietly stacked in a corner of the apartment. The pile was bigger than I imagined, each sheet a tiny confession, a testament to months of avoidance. As I sorted them, I noticed patterns, missed payments, overdraft fees stacking like little mountains, a few payments made to accounts that no longer existed. It was chaotic, but fixable. Slowly, methodically, I began mapping a repayment schedule, prioritizing the most urgent, the ones that would cause immediate penalties if left unresolved. Anissa hovered nearby, her hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking every movement. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the flicker of pride battling with relief. I didn't know where to start, she admitted softly. I kept thinking, maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. I understand, I said gently. But ignoring it hasn't made it go away. We're going to face it together. Her sigh was long, a quiet exhale of fear and exhaustion. I'm scared, she whispered. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. I know. Me too. But fear isn't going to fix this. Honesty and action will. Over the next few days, we began contacting creditors, negotiating payment plans, explaining the circumstances. Each phone call was a small battle, a test of patience. Anissa's voice trembled the first time she spoke to a creditor directly, but I stayed beside her, whispering encouragement, reminding her to breathe. It was grueling work, exhausting in its repetitiveness, but slowly, progress was made. In the evenings, after long calls and countless emails, we would sit in the quiet of the apartment, sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker through the windows. There was a tentative closeness in those moments, a fragile bond forming out of shared struggle. I noticed her starting to relax just a little, her laughter returning in small bursts, the tension in her hands easing. One afternoon, while reviewing a final statement, I noticed a particularly suspicious transfer, money sent to an account I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I realized this was the link to the friend she had mentioned, the one who had caused part of this chaos. Anissa, I said, holding up the paper. This is bigger than we thought. Who is this? Her face fell. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, she confessed. They promised to help me manage some investments. I thought it was safe. I thought I could rely on them, but they used it against me. They've taken advantage of my trust. The mixture of betrayal and helplessness in her voice made my chest tighten. I felt anger, not at her, but at the situation, at the unfairness of it. And yet, I knew that anger wasn't the solution. The solution was clarity, action, and accountability. I understand, I said slowly. We'll deal with this. But we need to be honest about it, not just with us, but with those involved. We need to take control before it controls us. Her eyes filled with tears, relief and fear mingling in equal measure. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, I said firmly, squeezing her hand. I'll be with you every step. But hiding it, pretending it doesn't exist, that's what almost broke us. Not the debt, not the mistake, but the silence. In that moment, I realized something fundamental. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against people or circumstances, they're fought within the delicate space between pride and honesty, between fear and courage. And as we sat together, piecing together a plan to confront the consequences, I felt a quiet, determined hope stirring within me. A week later, the truth began spilling out beyond the confines of our apartment. It started with a small ripple. Anissa's nephew, who handled some of her business correspondence, noticed overdue notices piling up and asked questions. Then, slowly, word spread among our extended family, the blocked cards at the cafe, the bank letters, the conversations we had tried to keep private. I braced myself for judgment, for whispers behind closed doors, for the subtle sting of embarrassment. But what unfolded was surprisingly layered. People were concerned, yes, some annoyed, others incredulous, but the dominant feeling was shock mixed with empathy. I realized then how fragile pride is, and how quickly it can crumble under scrutiny. At a small family dinner meant to address the issue, I watched Anissa carefully explain, her voice steady but laced with humility. She spoke of mistakes, of misplaced trust, of fear that had kept her silent. Each word seemed to chip away at the stigma she had feared, replacing it with something else, understanding. I never wanted anyone to see this side of me, she admitted, looking at each family member in turn. I thought I could handle it alone, but I was wrong. I ask for your patience as I make things right. There were pauses, a few sharp intakes of breath, but mostly, people listened. My husband, who had returned from his trip, nodded quietly, his usual stern expression softened. We'll get through this, he said simply. No drama, no anger, just support, calm and unflinching. I realized that public consequences were rarely about shaming, they were about accountability. Anissa faced questions from distant relatives and friends who had trusted her judgment. She was honest, and in that honesty, she regained credibility that could have been lost forever. There was no vindictiveness, no gloating, just the sober recognition that actions, even unintentional ones, carry weight. Even in the workplace, a few colleagues noticed irregularities in her accounts. Instead of exploiting the situation, they offered advice, resources, and contacts to help manage repayments. The truth had leaked, yes, but rather than causing ruin, it created an opportunity for guidance and learning. I found myself reflecting on this as I helped Anissa organize her new plan, each repayment, each call, each corrected mistake a small victory. We were no longer hiding, no longer shuffling papers in secrecy, no longer retreating from responsibility. Facing the problem publicly had forced clarity, honesty, and, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. One evening, as we sipped tea on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker through the haze of dusk, Anissa turned to me, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. I feel lighter, she said softly, almost in disbelief. Even though the problem is still here, it doesn't weigh the same. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of affirmation. She had endured shame, fear, and anxiety, and yet, she had confronted it with dignity. The social consequences were not punitive, they were corrective, guiding her toward accountability and growth. And in that, I saw a lesson not just for her, but for everyone. The courage to face mistakes openly is far more powerful than the illusion of perfection. For me, watching her navigate this public reckoning was transformative. It reminded me that family is not just about shared meals, birthdays, or celebrations. It's about standing together when the ground shifts beneath you, about offering support when pride has blinded someone to the necessity of asking for help. And as we sat together in quiet reflection, I understood that life doesn't need to be perfect to teach lessons. Sometimes, the messy, difficult moments carry the most profound truths about resilience, humility, and the power of facing consequences with courage and grace. In the weeks that followed, life gradually began to settle into a new rhythm. Anissa and I worked side by side, tackling each repayment, each overdue account, each lingering worry with methodical care. The initial panic and embarrassment had softened into quiet determination. She no longer flinched at phone calls, no longer avoided mail, no longer carried the weight of secrecy on her shoulders. The apartment felt warmer, calmer. I noticed little things, her humming while washing dishes, the way she would pause to smile at the sunset through our window, the careful way she brewed tea in the mornings, now without the anxious tremor that had haunted her hands. Even our conversations carried a new layer of intimacy. We spoke honestly about finances, about fears, about mistakes. And slowly, I realized that trust, real trust, was rebuilding itself between us. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Anissa joined me on the balcony. The night was quiet, the soft buzz of distant traffic the only sound. She leaned against the railing, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "I never thought I'd admit this," she said, voice low, reflective. "But going through this, facing it openly, it changed me. I feel stronger. I feel like I can breathe again." I smiled softly. "You were never weak," I said. "You just carried the weight alone. Now you're learning that asking for help doesn't diminish you, it empowers you." She nodded, and for a moment, silence wrapped around us like a comforting blanket. It was a silence that wasn't empty, it was full of lessons learned, wounds healing, and the quiet reassurance that mistakes, when confronted with honesty and courage, could become a source of growth rather than shame. The moral of the ordeal became clear to me in those quiet moments. Life is unpredictable, mistakes are inevitable, and pride can be both protective and dangerous. But resilience is born not from perfection, but from the willingness to face consequences, to acknowledge vulnerabilities, and to rebuild from them. Anissa began planning her finances with renewed care. I helped her set up automatic payments, reminders, and contingency plans. The fear of blocked cards or overdrafts no longer haunted our days. Each small success, a cleared bill, a confirmed transfer, a corrected error, was a victory, a tangible proof that responsibility and honesty could restore stability. Our relationship also deepened. The tension that had once hung over us like a storm cloud had lifted, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. I realized that this experience had taught me something profound about human nature. Pride may make us stumble, fear may make us hide, but empathy and patience can rebuild even the most fragile connections. Even my husband noticed the change. He commented one evening, with a rare softness in his voice, "You both seem lighter. More grounded." And it was true. The weight of unspoken shame had lifted, replaced by clarity, accountability, and the quiet satisfaction of progress. As I watched Anissa quietly sipping her tea, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had faced something difficult, exposed vulnerabilities that could have driven a wedge between us, and yet we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. I realized then that healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes, it's in the small victories, the steady steps taken with courage, honesty, and patience. Sometimes, it's in the quiet evenings on a balcony, sipping tea, sharing reflections, and knowing that life's lessons have been absorbed, not as punishment, but as growth. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the ordeal with the blocked cards, the financial chaos, and the hidden mistakes would stay with us, not as a mark of shame, but as a reminder of resilience, honesty, and the strength found in confronting life's most uncomfortable truths. Now, when I look back on that afternoon in the cafe, the memory doesn't sting the way it once did. I remember the clink of the declined cards, the soft murmur of other diners, the tightness in Annie's shoulders, and I also remember how it sparked a chain of honesty, courage, and healing that neither of us could have foreseen. Life isn't perfect. Bills get missed, trust is sometimes misplaced, and even the strongest people stumble under the weight of their own pride. But what matters isn't the mistake itself, it's what we do after. We chose transparency over shame. We chose action over avoidance. We chose to face the consequences together rather than let them quietly destroy what we valued. Anissa and I have found peace in the small victories, the clear debts, the steady finances, the quiet evenings with tea and laughter. More importantly, we've built a relationship stronger than before. She no longer feels the need to hide imperfections, and I no longer feel the tension of unspoken worry. There is honesty, patience, and empathy at the center of our connection now, a foundation that can withstand life's inevitable storms. Sometimes, when life hands us embarrassment, fear, or even betrayal, whether by circumstance or human error, we forget the simple power of truth. We forget that admitting vulnerability isn't weakness. It's courage. And it's in that courage that we find the ability to rebuild, to forgive, and to grow. So, when I tell this story, I tell it not as a cautionary tale, but as a reflection. The most difficult moments often carry the deepest lessons. Pride and fear may momentarily blind us, but honesty and courage illuminate the path forward. Would you have been able to confront the situation as I did? Could you have faced the fear, the shame, and the uncertainty with patience and compassion? Life doesn't hand out easy answers, but it does give us chances to grow stronger with every choice. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a situation where pride or fear nearly held you back, but honesty helped you overcome it? Let's learn from each other, and remember, even the smallest steps toward truth can transform our lives.